Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
There's a kind of arrogance that doesn't scream, it smirks. It strolls into the room like it owns the air. That was her. Elena had this way of making me feel like I should be grateful just to be next to her. She didn't need to say it outright, not for a while, at least. It was in the way she glanced at me when I spoke, like she was waiting for me to say something worth hearing. But for years, I tried not to notice it. Or maybe I did, and I just pretended it wasn't what it seemed. I told myself we were a team, that love looked different for everyone, and that maybe she just had a tougher way of showing it. You can convince yourself of a lot when your heart is involved, especially when you've already invested time, sacrifices, hope. And I did all of that for her. Elena wasn't always cold. In the beginning, she had this charm, confident, alluring. She had ambition, and I admired that. She talked about the life she wanted, the career she dreamed of building, and how she needed someone who could keep up with her, not hold her back. I didn't hesitate. I took extra shifts, postponed personal dreams, rerouted job opportunities across the country, all to give us the stability she said she needed. But something changed after we got married. The ambition remained, but the gratitude disappeared. The warmth faded, slowly but steadily. Over time, her affection turned transactional. If I planned a surprise dinner, she criticized the restaurant. If I complimented her outfit, she rolled her eyes and said, "You'd say that even if I wore a trash bag." When I landed a promotion, she barely looked up from her phone. Her standard response was, "Good. That'll help with the credit card bill." Still, I hung in there. I tried to be patient, to be understanding. I believed marriage had phases, and we were simply in a rough patch. But somewhere deep inside, I think I knew. I just wasn't ready to face it. Then came that evening. We were at a dinner she'd organized, a kind of reunion with her college friends. She was radiant that night, I'll admit it. Dressed in this sleek dark green dress that brought out her eyes, laughing freely with the people she hadn't seen in years. I hovered nearby, playing the polite husband, refilling glasses, ordering drinks, making small talk with strangers about topics I didn't care about. It wasn't my scene, but I was there for her. Always had been. At one point, I ended up across the room, chatting with one of her friends' husbands about the housing market. Boring, but safe. That's when I heard her voice rise above the hum of conversation. "You know, honestly," she said, loud enough that half the table could hear, "I think I deserve a medal for patience." Laughter followed. I turned, confused, only to catch her grinning as she pointed her wine glass vaguely in my direction. Seriously, though. I mean, I could have married anyone, right? But I chose stability. I chose reliable. She exaggerated the word like it was a punchline. That should count for something. More laughter. Nervous chuckles. The kind people give when they're unsure if they're supposed to be in on the joke or uncomfortable about it. Her friend Chloe leaned in. "Oh, come on, Elena. You're saying he should feel lucky." She didn't hesitate. "He is lucky. Anyone else would have been outmatched." And just like that, the room shifted. I could feel it. Eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away. Smiles faded or froze. And me? I just stood there, a glass in my hand, my face carefully still. I didn't make a scene, but something inside me moved. As if a weight I'd been carrying all this time suddenly adjusted, reminding me it was never supposed to be mine to bear. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I nodded, smiled when expected, exchanged pleasantries, held her coat as we left. She didn't notice the change. Or if she did, she didn't mention it. On the drive home, she hummed along to the radio while I stared at the road, wondering how many other times she'd said things like that when I wasn't around. That night, she kissed me goodnight without a second thought and drifted off to sleep. I lay there next to her, staring at the ceiling, the words echoing in my head. "He is lucky." As if I hadn't been the one holding things together for years. As if being chosen by her was some grand reward, and I was the undeserving recipient. I realized something as I stared into the darkness. I was just tired of trying, tired of giving her so much power over my sense of worth. I didn't know it at the time, but that dinner was the quiet fracture. The moment I started seeing her not as my wife, but as the woman who stood across from me in a crowded room, making a joke at my expense. And I wasn't laughing. You'd think it would take something big to change a person's heart, an affair, a betrayal, some thunderous event that can't be ignored. But for me, it was something much quieter. After that dinner, something in my perception of her began to unspool, slowly and steadily, like a rope that had been straining under pressure for too long. In the days that followed, I started watching her differently. The kind that comes when you finally stop hoping for things to get better and begin to accept what's right in front of you. I saw how she looked at her phone with more interest than she ever gave our conversations. I noticed how often she left her dishes in the sink for me to clean, like I was the help and not the man who built the life she stood on. I started keeping track not of wrongdoings, but of moments. Instances where she made it clear I was no longer her partner, just her convenience. A week later, she was on the phone with her sister, pacing through the hallway. I had just stepped into the bedroom, still wearing my work clothes, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. I paused when I heard my name. Honestly, she said, laughing, he's like wallpaper. I don't even notice he's there half the time. It's like living with furniture that makes direct deposits. I froze. Her sister laughed. Well, you always said you'd marry for comfort. Exactly, she replied without hesitation. And you know what? I've earned it. I could have married someone exciting and volatile like Mark. But no, I went with safe, reliable, boring. And now I get to put my feet up and relax. I stepped out of the room, closing the door behind me, moving quietly so she wouldn't know I'd heard. My hand stayed on the doorknob a second longer than it needed to, as if I could lock away what I'd just heard. In another life, that would have broken me. I was just stunned at how thoroughly I'd been demoted in her mind, from partner, husband, to a piece of furniture with a paycheck. That night, I didn't bring it up. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table while she watched TV in the other room, eating takeout she didn't even ask if I wanted. And for the first time in a long time, I asked myself a question I'd avoided for years. What would my life look like if she wasn't in it? The thought didn't scare me. It felt like air after being underwater for too long. In the following weeks, I kept my distance, not cold, just less available. If she asked me for something, I'd do it. But I stopped offering. I stopped anticipating her needs, jumping to fill the gap she left behind. And I noticed something she didn't even seem to realize. My absence didn't disrupt her rhythm. She had already built a life where I was just an accessory. Then came the real twist. Her best friend, Tessa, and I had always had a cordial but distant relationship. We interacted mostly at gatherings, exchanged polite smiles and brief conversations, nothing more. But about a month after the dinner party, she texted me out of the blue. Hey, I know this is awkward, but can we talk? We met for coffee. It was raining that day, one of those gray, moody afternoons where the air feels heavy, like something's about to happen. She looked uncomfortable from the moment she walked in, clutching her umbrella like a shield. I don't know how to say this, she began, barely able to meet my eyes. But you deserve to know something. My stomach tightened. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I didn't expect this. She made a bet. About you. I blinked. A bet. Tessa nodded. Back when she and I went to Vegas last year. She told me she was going to push you, little by little, just to see how far you'd go before you finally snapped or left. I stared at her, trying to process the words. You're joking. I wish I was, she said quietly. She thought it was funny. Said you were so desperate to keep her that she could basically do anything. She even called it a relationship experiment. She wanted to see how much she could humiliate you without you walking away. There was silence between us for a moment, filled only by the quiet clatter of cups and distant rain. I didn't respond. There's more, Tessa added. She's been talking to someone. An ex. Nothing physical yet, I think. But it's crossed lines. I stood up. I needed air. I didn't even say goodbye. Back in the car, I sat there with the engine running, watching the windshield wipers swipe back and forth like a metronome counting the seconds since everything shifted. It wasn't the betrayal that shook me, it was the cruelty of it. She didn't just fall out of love. She turned it into sport. That night, I walked into the house like a man seeing it for the first time. Same table. Same woman sitting cross-legged on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with a look of mild disinterest. But everything felt different. She glanced up as I walked in, then went back to her screen. That was the moment I knew. Whatever came next, she wouldn't see it coming. Because she no longer believed I was capable of leaving. After that conversation with Tessa, I moved differently. I didn't want to confront Elena, because confrontation gives the other person power. It gives them the chance to twist, to lie. The next morning, I got up before her and left the house without saying a word. I went to the bank. It was quiet inside. That early weekday hum of fluorescent lights and hushed voices. I sat down with an advisor and began the process of moving half of our joint funds into a separate account. My name only. I didn't clear it with her. I didn't tell her I was doing it. We had enough in there to keep things civil, at least for now. When I got home that evening, Elena was in the kitchen, sipping wine and scrolling through something on her tablet. She looked up and said, You didn't even text me today. That's unlike you. I shrugged. Busy day. That was it. No more questions. No follow-up. Just a faint nod. And then she was back to whatever held her attention more than I ever did. Tessa and I stayed in contact. Nothing inappropriate. Just quiet, coded exchanges that hinted at more truths I hadn't uncovered yet. She was wrestling with guilt, not just for being complicit in Elena's cruel bet, but because she had stayed silent for so long. I told her she didn't owe me anything, but part of me appreciated her honesty, because it confirmed what I had already started to believe. I wasn't imagining it. Elena had never been the woman I thought she was. Over the next few days, I started to unravel the rest of the threads. I went through old messages, calendar invites that didn't line up with the stories she'd told me. There was a pattern to it. Certain weekends, certain names. One name, in particular, showed up more than once. Ryan. Ryan had been a client of hers. Or so she said. Someone she'd met at a networking event. I'd seen him once. I'd shaken his hand at a gallery opening. He looked me up and down the way people do when they've already decided you're no competition. Now I knew why. One night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter when she went to shower. Normally, she carried it everywhere. That night, she didn't. I picked it up. My hands didn't shake. I was done being nervous. There were texts. Of course there were. The kind that leave no room for doubt. Last night was perfect. I miss the way you touch me. He doesn't even notice anymore. And then, chillingly, I think he's too afraid to leave me. That one stuck with me. It wasn't just that she was cheating. It was that she saw me as weak. An obstacle she didn't even feel the need to avoid anymore. I put the phone down exactly as I found it. Then I went to the bedroom, lay beside her, and listened to her breathing slow as she drifted off to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the version of myself I'd been for so long. The version she had counted on. The dependable fool. The next weekend, I told her I'd be working late. Instead, I checked into a hotel across town. I needed space. Not just physical, but mental. I needed to see what it felt like to be out of that house, away from her, making choices without her shadow over me. It felt like waking up from anesthesia. Colors were sharper. Sounds clearer. Even silence had a richness I hadn't felt in years. When I returned Sunday evening, she didn't even ask where I'd been. She didn't care enough to notice I hadn't been home. That week, I canceled her subscriptions, magazines she never read, beauty boxes she never used but insisted on keeping, because I liked the idea of them. She noticed that one. What happened to my deliveries? She asked over coffee. I sipped mine. We don't need them. She narrowed her eyes. Since when do you decide that on your own? I met her gaze. Since I stopped being your pet project. There was a pause. A subtle shift. Like she was trying to recalibrate her tone. You're acting strange, she said carefully. No, I replied. I'm just acting. That week, I started putting things in motion. Quietly, I called a real estate agent about appraising the house. I spoke to a lawyer. I pulled my name off her car lease. Every step was a nail in the coffin of a marriage she thought she could bury me in. And she still didn't see it coming. She was too wrapped up in herself, too sure that I'd never walk, too convinced that her charm, her superiority would always be enough to keep me in orbit. But I was leaving the atmosphere, and she hadn't even looked up to notice the launch. It didn't happen all at once. These things never do. There wasn't a final straw. Just a moment. It was a Saturday morning. She was standing in the hallway, towel wrapped around her head, scrolling through her phone as steam still clung to her shoulders from the shower. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and pretending to read an article I'd opened half an hour ago. Brian, she called, almost casually. Where's my gold bracelet? The one Ryan gave me. Remember that one from that networking event? I didn't answer immediately. When I finally looked up, I met her gaze and said simply, I pawned it. Her expression shifted in slow motion, first confusion. You what? I sold it, I said, voice level. Put the money toward the new account I opened last month. There it was. That flicker in her eyes. Shock. That I had done something without asking, without caring how she felt about it. Is this some kind of game now? She asked, lowering the towel from her head. Are we taking turns undermining each other? No, I said, setting down the mug. I'm just done pretending. That stopped her. No sarcasm. Just stillness. A kind of silence I hadn't seen in her in years. I know about Ryan, I added, watching her face carefully. She blinked, jaw tightening, but she didn't speak. That told me more than any excuse could have. I know about the messages. The hotel. The bet you made with Tessa. Still nothing. She looked like she was waiting for the punchline, or trying to decide which lie to lead with. I didn't give her the chance. You thought I wouldn't leave, I said quietly. That I needed you more than I needed my self-respect. Finally, she spoke. This is revenge? I shook my head. No. Revenge means I still care. This is closure. She sat down slowly, as if her legs no longer trusted her weight. She was trying to keep her composure, but her voice cracked when she said, You're not serious. I've already spoken to a lawyer. That was it. The blow she hadn't expected. Her confidence flickered, like a light fighting to stay on in a storm. I don't understand, she said after a long pause. What happened to us? We happened to us, I replied. Or maybe just you. You treated our marriage like a performance, and I was the understudy you never thought would go off script. Still, she searched for the right response. Her pride wouldn't let her beg. But her ego couldn't let me go so easily either. I didn't think you had it in you, she whispered. I didn't either, I said. But apparently, your contempt has a way of waking people up. She flinched like I'd slapped her, but I didn't stop. Tessa told me everything. And she didn't just tell me because she felt guilty. She told me because she couldn't stand what you were turning into. Her eyes narrowed. Of course she did. She wanted to protect me. There was a moment, a single beat, where I saw something rare in her expression, uncertainty. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure of her place in my life. You think she's better than me? She asked. I think she still knows what it means to respect someone. Elena stood slowly, as if some invisible weight had settled on her shoulders. She didn't cry. That wasn't her style. But something about her seemed dimmer. When are you leaving? She asked, voice dull. I stood, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out the suitcase I'd packed 2 nights ago. I already have. That afternoon, I drove away from the house we'd once filled with hopes, laughter that now felt scripted. I didn't look back. A week later, I received a text from her, short, almost hesitant. Can we talk? I didn't respond. Instead, I posted a photo. Nothing flashy. Just me at a quiet rooftop bar, city lights in the background, a whiskey in hand, a smile that wasn't forced. It was the first time in years I'd smiled like that. Within minutes, the typing bubbles appeared, then disappeared. She never sent another message. I knew she was watching, and the silence was the loudest apology I'd ever heard. I didn't expect the silence to last. Not from her. Elena had never been one to accept defeat quietly. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and aside from that one unanswered text, she stayed quiet. Not a phone call. Not a letter. Not even a stray email disguised as a mistake. It was as if she knew that I was gone for good. I had moved out fully by then. New apartment. New rhythm. Even the way I walked felt different, like the tension in my shoulders had dissolved without me noticing. It's strange how much space you can reclaim when you're not constantly shrinking to fit someone else's idea of what you're supposed to be. The apartment was modest, but it was mine. Not a shared space, not a museum of compromises. I picked the furniture. I chose the artwork. I stocked the fridge with exactly what I liked, without worrying if it was organic or presented on the right shelf. That first weekend, I made coffee in my quiet kitchen, played my music, and stood barefoot on the cold tile floor with a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Some mornings, I'd walk past the park near my building and just sit. No phone, no agenda. Just air, and sky, and strangers who didn't know me as the man she used to mock behind closed doors. There were days when I'd catch myself wondering how she was coping, if she still walked through that hallway with the same entitled strut, or if she hesitated now when she passed the mirror. She had to see that the man she thought would fall apart without her was thriving in her absence. I wasn't pretending to be happy. I was just free. It didn't take long for friends to reach out, mutual ones, people who had always hovered in the background of our life together. Some messaged cautiously, unsure if picking a side would cost them the other. But the ones who mattered didn't hesitate. They told me stories I hadn't known, ways she behaved when I wasn't around. Most of it didn't surprise me anymore, but hearing it from their mouths confirmed what I'd already accepted. She had never valued me. Not as a partner. Tessa and I stayed in touch, too. Nothing romantic, not then, maybe not ever. Just conversations that didn't feel like traps, exchanges that weren't loaded with expectation. She apologized again once, near the end of a long call. I told her not to. That regret only makes sense when we knew better and chose the wrong path anyway. She hadn't. She'd just been quiet for too long, like I had. And slowly, people stopped asking about Elena. Her name stopped showing up in my inbox, in passing comments, and forced questions meant to gauge my bitterness. It was like she faded into a shadow of a life I'd already finished living. I never blocked her, never changed my number. She could reach me if she wanted to, but she didn't, because she knew that reaching out meant stepping into a reality she no longer controlled. And maybe that was the worst punishment of all, seeing the man she once condescended to, now moving through the world without hesitation, without fear. One evening, months after I'd left, I ran into someone who worked with her, a colleague of hers from one of the PR firms she used to collaborate with. She didn't recognize me at first. Said I looked different. Lighter, she added, after a moment. Not just physically. You look unburdened. I laughed. That's one way to put it. She hesitated before speaking again. I don't know if I should say this, but Elena, she's not doing so well. She's quieter now. Some of us barely recognize her. I nodded, just understanding. Sometimes, when a person builds their whole identity on superiority, the silence that follows rejection is louder than any fight could ever be. I never asked what had happened to Ryan, whether they were still in touch, whether she even wanted him in the end. Those weren't questions I needed answered, because that part of the story didn't matter anymore. She was no longer the main character in my life, just a former chapter, one that people might skim through to get to the good part. And the good part was now. The good part was me, waking up in a space I chose, surrounded by peace I earned. No one measuring my usefulness by how quickly I caved. Sometimes I'd get notifications, Elena liking an old photo, viewing a new one, hovering around my digital life like a ghost trying to remember what it felt like to haunt. But she never said anything, just watched, as if silence was the only currency she had left. And in that silence, I found something more powerful than closure. Proof that somewhere, deep down, she finally realized. I was never the one lucky to have her. She was the one who never knew what she had until she had to watch it walk away.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.